To see everyone this morning. If you want to go ahead and turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, that's where we're going to be spending most of our time today. And before we start our class, I asked Dylan to lead us in an opening prayer.
All mankind that has ever been, very, very humbly bow before thee as we're beginning this period of worship of you, your Son, this day. We thank you for the beautiful day itself. Thank you especially that we can gather together with one another and we can really get into your word over these next several minutes and consider the wisdom that you provide to us. We're thankful for your patience with us as we work to be more faithful to you. We're thankful for the encouragement that you provide us to one another. We're thankful that you communicate to us clearly your will for us in your written word. Help us to rightly discern your teaching and to see its application in our lives, and help us to take it, share it with others in the world that need to learn the same. Father, we are mindful of many things going on within the families in our number and the body as a whole. We pray in every respect for your help, for all the help we are all in need of. For your hand, your continued hand, we thank you for the care that you have so clearly provided. We pray for your help, and we pray for your shield. Pray for your helping growth. All that we walk through in the course of this world around us that wants so much to take us from you. Thank you again, therefore, for this time this morning that we can gather together with one another and worship you. In your Son's most holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right. So last class, we went over Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and specifically verses 1 through 11 is really where our focus was. So we've been introduced to this book, and what is the, I don't know if we want to call it the premise or the great experiment of Ecclesiastes that we kind of brought up last class? What is that? What is that premise or that great experiment that Solomon's exploring? Ken? Nothing new under the sun, right? And primarily, I think verse 13 of chapter 1, I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. So we talked about how that a lot of these terms that Solomon uses, all is vanity, under the sun, striving after the winds, they are all designed to impart this sense of, I guess, temporariness, right? Impertinence that is just naturally part of life. And in chapter 1 specifically, right, when we look through verses 1 through 11, what were some of the main points we drew out about Solomon's, because that's really Solomon's preface to this whole book. What were some of the main points we drew out in that opening discourse? Yeah, right? So Solomon's approaching this experiment from such a very physical perspective. I'm going to do everything I can with my money, my people, my wisdom, my glory, my power. And specifically in chapter 1, he starts out with some really strong, and we kind of use the word depressing language. There is no remembrance of former things. All things are full of weariness. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. And we kind of ended chapter 1 on the idea and the premise that Solomon has learned, is learning, you might say, that it's not enough to be wise. It's not enough to know God. There's still something more that has to be done there, right? So coming into chapter 2, and we're primarily looking at verses 12 through 26 today, we're going to be talking a lot about work, the idea of our toil on this earth, what we're working towards while we're here, and legacy. Those are going to be really Solomon's key focuses in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, and what I want us to really talk about, because we won't read through all of it, but the initial 11 verses of chapter 2 are Solomon talking about how he went about this great experiment that is the kind of premise of the book, right? So I made great works, I built houses, planted vineyards, made gardens and parks, made myself pools to water the forest of growing trees. I bought slaves, I had great possessions, gathered for myself silver and gold, treasures, singers, concubines, became great and surpassed all, and all my wisdom remained with me, right? He makes a point to state that throughout all this, he retained the a massive wisdom that God had granted to him. And in verse 11 of chapter 2, after doing all this, his great conclusion, right? Because we talked about how Solomon's going to make an observation, he's going to observe the end of the event, and then he's going to draw a conclusion. And his conclusion in verse 11, I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity, and striving after the wind. There was nothing to be gained under the sun. So that sounds very final, right? That sounds like a good endpoint for a lot of people. Like, oh, well, it's all meaningless, let's give up. But he's going to go on from there, and he has some continuations to that thought in verses 12 through 26. And let's go ahead and read verses 12 through 17. Would someone be able to do that for me? Ethan. All right. So real happy note to start off on here. So in verse 12, as he's considering the fact that he's done all this, it's all kind of pointless. And what is his initial draw, right? So I considered wisdom and madness and folly. And what is his first question, or his first thing that really makes him question what all he's done? We're all going to die. And specifically in verse 12, what can the man do who comes after the king? Right? So, again, we talked about this a little last class. Solomon's perspective really is: can I find fulfillment on this earth through my physical works, my physical wisdom, my possessions? Right? How can I gain fulfillment on this earth? And the first question he considers after everything that he's done, right? All the in things that, I mean, strain incredulity, right? For us to consider doing these in a single lifespan. And he says, what can the person who comes after me do? Right? And we talked about this a little in chapter 1, right? There's nothing new under the sun. There's no reinventing the wheel. And I almost find this a humorous question to ask, because Solomon's just talked about how he's done everything you can do while you're king on this earth, right? At this time, money, wisdom, I mean, wives or concubines, he had everything. What is the king who comes after him going to do that he hasn't done? Nothing, right? Nothing's going to be new. Nothing's going to have changed, really. There's not going to be any grand fulfillment or follow-up to this. So he's setting up this idea where he's talking about what we leave behind, what is the purpose of our work here, and what kind of legacy is going to be left by that toil. And he's going to start by talking a little bit about wisdom again, right? Because he's mentioned already, I retained all my wisdom throughout this. And he says, He saw that there's more gain in wisdom than in folly. There is more gain in light than in darkness. It's verse 13. And verse 14, I like the NLT's rendering of this verse a little bit better. And in verse 14 in the NLT is translated, "For the wise can see where they are going, but fools walk in the dark." I think it's just simply putting it a little bit better, right? That what does wisdom really allow you to do on this earth? Right? Because we've already established that being wise in itself is not fulfilling, right? Being wise in itself does not bring you closer to God. So, what is the purpose of wisdom on this earth? Right. Mhm. Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. That's a great answer, Ethan. Mhm. Right. Mhm. Right. Yep. No, that's a good point to bring up. I think that kind of going back a little to Phil's point, right? So something we talked a lot about in chapter one was the idea of this kind of double-edged sword that is knowledge and wisdom, right? And going all the way back to the book of Genesis, right? You cannot increase knowledge without that knowledge coming with good and evil, right? The tree of knowledge of good and evil, and increasing your knowledge, increasing your wisdom, it does come with, like Phil said, that understanding of futility, right? And that's Solomon's perspective here. He was incredibly wise. He saw he was able to see, I guess you could say, the long term effects of what he was doing, and there were no long term effects, right? He's in the grand scheme of things. What my wisdom allowed me to see was that it was all folly. It was all purposeless, and so he's gonna, as he often does in the book here, he's gonna kind of pack some really complex thoughts into these just couple verses here. And the question I asked us, which we've already answered a little bit, but in verses 14 through 16, there's a bit of everyone who I talked to made fun of me for using the word vacillatory, but there's a bit of like waffling that's going back here, right? Where Solomon's saying one thing, he's saying, yeah, it's really good to have wisdom because you can see where you're going, and then he's saying, actually, I hate life because I was so wise, and it's really terrible to be wise. Is he contradicting himself here? What point is he trying to make, and how does this language, right, this kind of back and forth, and he's bringing up good things and bad things about the same topic, how does that kind of inform us on Solomon's narrative or this experiment he's doing? Dylan? Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. fantastic answer. That's kind of when I asked the question, right, the point that I wanted us to bring out, because um, it's easy for me when I read Ecclesiastes to see them right as bite-sized proverbs and take things a little bit individualistically. And Solomon is constructing a detailed argument here, right? He is laying out his procedure, the things he's seen, his emotions, right, the things he felt, how this affected him on this earth. And so, kind of like, and I think your answer to the question really is a perfect encapsulation of what he's doing here, right? If your pursuit is wisdom, it's folly, right? If you're sitting here on this earth and you're thinking, I'm just going to be as wise and know as much as I can, you're going to end up just like the fool. But, like Dylan brought up and like Ethan brought up, but it's a lot better to see where you're going. And a lot better to know this shouldn't be my primary pursuit in life, right? And what knowledge and wisdom can show you is that there is something greater, something beyond this life which I need to be pursuing. So yeah, thank you for that answer. All right, so we're coming off of that, and in verse 17, I kind of jumped the gun there, but he comes to this conclusion. So I hated life, right? Because what is done under the sun was grievous to me. For all is vanity and a striving after the wind. Everything he worked for was purposeless, right? In the end, it was all meaningless. What he had strove for, what he had done, his pursuits. And so he comes to this idea, he makes this statement, so I hated life. And when we consider verses 12 through 17 all together, right? Because I think this is its own little argument he's making as he's about to transition to a greater talk on legacy and on toil specifically. Do you think, right? And this is more just a thought question. I don't in my mind I don't have a right or wrong answer, and we've answered it a little bit here. Do you think that there is some element of it's better to understand the futility of life on earth or to be ignorant of it? And is Solomon's statement that he makes here, I hate life, is that a wrong statement to make? And I guess the question I'm asking here, is this a statement that we, as people who follow God, should make in our own lives? And maybe some of us had made that statement in our own lives. But is this a statement we as children of God should make to ourselves or have made, and why or why not? Well, that's kind of a long question. But Ethan?
I certainly think that understanding the futility of this life is the proper and maybe one of the only mindsets you can have to fully understand how much more we should prioritize the life to come, right? It's once you understand, like once you get into this mindset that nothing we do will matter in our own life, and also nothing will never have a lasting legacy, right, either. So we can't even affect the physical world or this physical life after we're gone for, a long time either. That's the place you have to get to realize, well, then what's the point? And that's naturally where you go to, oh, okay, well, obviously in this life is not important. So what's should I be looking to? And that's where we get the answer, which is to God. So I don't know if that answers the question of whether or not we should, quote, hate life, but certainly understanding the futility of life, I think, is almost a requirement to fully prioritize the next life over this one.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think what we're going to see here, even though it's some pretty dark language right now, is that Solomon is actually going to introduce to us in this section the first element of hope we have in life, and it's almost contradicting the way he does it, but he's going to introduce our hope in life that we can have and the contentment we can have in life from the concept of, if you understand that all on this earth is futile, well, you can actually find a hope, right? There is a contentment that can come from that. So I think that's a good point. Chris?
I think maybe I'm just going to say the same thing you said, but the life that he hated was the life here. Yes, the impermanent life. And he was frustrated because his works and his reputation would go the same way as pretty much anyone else here.
Yeah. So we got to remember too, this is Solomon's journey as he is introspective of life under the sun and the greater meaning of things. And so we can't just say, well, Solomon said this, so I can say that too, or I cannot say that, because he is examining at first life under the sun, and that's going to lead to this grasping after the wind. It's going to, we would call it an emptiness feeling, you know, because you're going to be empty in your hand if you try to grab after the wind. You're not going to have anything. And so all of these things that he's seeing under the sun without God in the picture, he hated life because it's frustrating. There's emptiness at the end of the day. But if we have the right perspective, we would never, if we have the right perspective, we would never say this. Right. Exactly as he has said it. Again, this is his journey.
Right. No.
To the question about is it worth being wise, I think he's referring to an earthly wisdom, like wisdom of how things work here on earth, and it is far more desired to have godly wisdom. And so, if we have godly wisdom, then these things here they don't matter as much.
Correct. Yeah. No, that's a great point.
And yes, I want to just kind of focus in on this statement here because I want us to understand and realize that we are observing one man's journey to a great conclusion, right? And so I brought up that we always want to keep in mind that at the end of all of this, everything Solomon says here, his conclusion is it is best to serve God and keep His commandments and live your life before God. So we're going to see things that if we don't consider that this is one sinful, right, man's journey to coming to that conclusion, there are things that we have to understand. He's going to say things that we really, that's not going to be the way we live our life. We shouldn't go through life saying, I just hate being here. I hate this life. Everything I do is pointless. I hate it all, right? So,
Writes to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 5, he's telling them of the trials that he and his cohorts, the apostles or those who would travel with the apostles, faced, and all the trials and tribulations. But he says in verse 7, but we don't let that get us down because our vision is not life under the sun, as it were, but we walk by faith, not by sight. There's something better.
Yes. And ultimately what we're going to see Solomon get to, even in this same chapter, is that we shouldn't hate life because life is an opportunity to serve God. Life is an opportunity to work for Him, to show His love, right? That it is all an opportunity for God. So I just wanted to highlight that right here that, there is going to be some statements that are made throughout the book of Ecclesiastes that should give you pause. And you should also consider that Solomon is making his way towards the correct conclusion. He's not starting. Right? So let's go ahead and get into the latter half of chapter 2. And would somebody go ahead and read verses 18 through 23 for me?
I can do it.
Thank you.
And I hated all my I toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? And he will rule over all my labor, in which I toiled, in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. Therefore, I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. For there is a man who labors with wisdom, knowledge, and skill. And he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. For what has man for all his labor, and for the striving of his heart with which he has toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful, and his work burdensome. Even in the night, his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity.
Thank you. Okay.
now he's going to talk a lot about legacy, right? That's really what he's going to be speaking about for the rest of chapter 2. And the idea, I think really this is it's maybe a more philosophical way of saying you can't take it with you. right? Because he's done all these great things, and what bothers him the most about everything he's done? Right. I don't have any control over the next guy. Right? He's going to come along. What if he destroys it all? Which, the great irony is the next guys did. The kingdom was divided. Israel was never again unified. It's literally all downhill from here for the nation of Israel. And that bothers Solomon immensely because his wisdom allows him to see that the next guy's probably not going to be as wise. He's not going to be as smart with his money or great with his armies, right? He's not going to be as physically adept as I am, and it's all going to come to ruin, and I can't do anything about that. So, Chris?
It's that idea of this person does great things, the next generation ruins it.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see verse 13 when I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. So we know that there's day and there's night. I think it's the cyclical nature of this life here where you have wise people and then you have people that ruin all the good work.
Right.
And then you have wise people again. And maybe that's an explanation.
That's a fantastic point. I mean, this is.
For us, it's maybe a more difficult idea to, to conceptualize or put in our heads. But the idea of rising and falling empires, I think, was a much more prominent theme of this time, right? And it was, I'm not going to say a daily occurrence, but great empires arose and then they fell in the span of, as little as 10 years in some areas of this part of the world at this time. So the idea of some people are going to arise, they're going to do great things, it's all going to collapse immediately, is a lot of people reading this will be like, yeah, I mean, we see it happen all the time. Great. They built that great city over there. It was destroyed 3 years later. What is the point of that? So, and I wanted us to take a second here before we kind of draw his conclusion, because something he says in verse 23 really stood out to me. For all his days, and this speaking about the man who's done all these great things, right? Who's worked so hard, he's done all the good stuff. His days are full of sorrow. His work is a vexation. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. And I wanted us to talk a little bit about it, spend maybe a little bit more time here, because this is one of the first statements in the book of Ecclesiastes I can really relate to. I don't know about you guys, but there have been a lot of moments in my life where I just think about my job, and I wasn't building gardens, I wasn't buying slaves, I wasn't building pools, I was just plumbing, right? And I can think of many times in my life where I was so stressed, I had trouble sleeping at night because I was really focused on what was going on at work. I was really just bothered about what was happening, right? Where my work was a vexation to me, and it was difficult. This is one of the first parts of Ecclesiastes where I'm like, oh, I get that. I don't understand planting forests, Solomon, but I can understand what you're talking about there. And so, is this something that maybe it's just me? Hopefully, it's not just me. And I wanted us to have a little bit of a thought question here. Have you ever had a job or a work situation or just a life situation where you felt the same? Where you thought, my day today fills me with sorrow and vexation. And at night, I sit there and I'm just stressed and I don't know what I'm going to do and I can't sleep. And what I want to ask us is, why did your job, your life, whatever you were working on, why did it make you feel that way? And this doesn't have to be a hyper-specific answer. It can be kind of general. But why does it make you feel that way at times? Ethan?
Huge imbalance there, right? So, I'm willing to suffer a great deal if I'm getting a lot in return, but I'm not getting that. So it's like more frustrating. Like, why am I required to stress myself out more if I'm not even feeling like I'm getting what I'm owed for all that?
Yeah,
That vexation.
that's a great part of it, Dad.
This attitude becomes prevalent in us when that's the only thing we're thinking about.
Yes.
And when we just stop or fail to think beyond it.
Yeah.
Like, things we would set greater purposes, greater meaning. But when we are only thinking about, what I have to do at work tomorrow, and that's the end all.
Yeah.
Of course, it's going to keep me awake at night,
Yeah.
ruin my day, and make me hate life.
No, and that's exactly.
What I was thinking here is that when that's your focus, right? And I think all of us in this room, right, can say that there has been a time where our job or some situation in life, that was our focus, right? The thing I was going to do tomorrow was all I was focused on. And it is, like Solomon pointed out in chapter 1, entirely unfulfilling. There is always more to do, right? There's always a lot of work to do for what you feel like is not enough reward. And the eye is never filled and the ear is never filled. And it's vexing, it's stressful. Because if all you're thinking about is that physical job, that toil, and I'm going to work this hard so that I can get this, and then work this hard to get this, and it's never ending, and it's unfulfilling, and it leads to this sort of vexed state.
Yeah, he couldn't sleep. God had already told me, because of your sin and idolatry, it's going.
Yep.
And so, of course, he couldn't sleep. He had, people have knowledge sometimes, but not wisdom.
Mhm.
He had wisdom, but he didn't make application. He knew God's law. He knew the commandments. He knew what he should be doing. He failed.
Yeah.
And so, in that comes guilt. And I think sometimes when we look at me, we put ourselves and our lives and our priorities ahead of God's and his life, and our future is on me,
Mhm.
what I did, what I should do,
Right.
what I deserve, and we forget to be content.
Mhm.
And in that, you will take yourself down.
Yep.
And you won't be able to sleep.
Yes. No, that's a fantastic point. That segues us perfectly right into his conclusion on this.
And verses 24 through 26, starting in verse 24, right? Or just because of everything he said, right? So his days are full of sorrow, his work is vexation, his heart does not rest. This is vanity. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This is also a vanity and striving after the wind. So we get this first message of hope, right? Through the gloom, right? We're beginning to see that light of wisdom that Solomon's going to bring to us. And that is, just like Louise said, when your focus is beyond, right? I'm not, this job, this thing I'm doing right now, or this thing I need to work on, it's not the goal. It's not going to bring me fulfillment, and it's not why I'm here on this earth. There's enjoyment to find in your toil, right? There is good things that can come from just living your day to day, from eating, drinking, working, right? There is a contentment you can have when your focus is on God. Because apart from him, there is no purpose, right? And that's been the whole thing he's been harping on so hard this whole time. So when you set about without God, when you set out to do great things without God, it's not great. And it's not worth anything. And it's all going to pass away, and you're going to be sitting there wondering, what have I given my life for? And I wanted to ask this the final question on the worksheet I sent out. So, with 18 through 35, there is no 35. So, and I just asked us to think of some biblical, maybe even historical examples of people who did great things that were undone by those who came after, right? So, whoever you want to think of, or whoever you did think of, does that make the achievements of that person completely meaningless, right? Biblical or historical? And I wanted us to draw a contrast between people who left spiritual legacies and physical legacies, and how our answers differ between those. Did anybody have any examples or anything they thought of? Mhm. Yeah, that's a great example, right? That amazing, beautiful temple, right? I mean, we have verse after verse about how great it was, completely destroyed. Ethan?
Be some good kings and things are on the upswing, and then immediately, like the next generation, things go back down.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple generations later, it comes back up. It's just a constant cycle of people trying to pull themselves back out. And
Right.
the next generation ruining it.
Yeah. I very specifically
Thought of King Josiah in 2 Kings 22 and 23, because we read, I mean, Josiah leads this incredible reform in the nation, and I mean, he brings back the proper observances, he brings the law back. He does these incredible things. He really brings the nation back closer to God. But in 2 Kings 23, verse 31, after all the great things that Josiah did, Jehoahaz, who was his direct successor, was 23 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. So, I mean, immediately after Josiah passes away, there's an evil king back. And the remembrance is according to all that his fathers had done, right? So, well, we skipped Josiah. It's back to the way everyone else was, right? So then my other question comes in, does that make the achievements, so let's consider things like Solomon's temple, right? Like the nation of Israel, like what Josiah's spiritual reform, right? Does that make those achievements meaningless? Is it the fact that Solomon's temple was built, that Josiah instituted this reform, does that mean anything because the successors, those who came after, destroyed it all?
In the meaninglessness, right? So the fact that Solomon's temple, for example, he built this amazing temple. He had all this wisdom. He was the most powerful ruler of the known world in his day. The meaningful part is that is in fact meaningless, because without God, it all goes away. The meaning is found in living your life with God, understanding that yes, what is on this earth has limits. It is very limited, in fact. Your true meaning is beyond your life here. And that's the meaning in the meaninglessness.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Even when Solomon dedicates the temple, I mean, he even says, we know that God does not dwell in houses. Right. And so it really encapsulates everything Kurt just said too. Like, if you think the meaning of all this is that we built this cool building, that's meaningless.
Yeah.
If you understand that the meaning here is that we are serving God, and this is how he told us to serve him right now, there's the meaning.
Yeah. No, that's perfect, Louise.
Everything that we as human beings make is nothing, like Kurt was saying. But yet, if you look at Ecclesiastes 1, the things that God created, the cycle of life, human, the rivers, the water, all of the cycles in our bodies, they're all there.
Yeah.
And they survive throughout these generations. Everything else is just history, and there's very little of it left.
Yeah.
But everything that God created is still there.
No.
Putting it to work.
You mentioned spiritual legacies a few minutes ago, but it's the same thing with spiritual legacies. The greatest spiritual legacies are the servant, like Moses, who bends his will to God, and God's the one whose strong arm is glorified.
Yes.
And so we got to be careful about that. That I'm going to build this great spiritual legacy, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to look at my great works for
Right.
God. God's not glorified in that, but God's glorified when we bend our will to Him, submit completely, and be the best servants we can be. he's glorified, his strength is shown. And because our ways are unwise at best.
Yeah.
And so all glory to him. That's how a spiritual legacy is built.
Yes. Yeah.
You achieve greatness by being humble.
Yes, that's the. I think that's a big part of what Solomon's really getting at in Ecclesiastes is that you build the greatest legacies in the most counterintuitive manner, right? Because you don't build them, God does.
Right? It's your submission to God. It's the way you give your life to Him. That's what leaves the greatest legacy, if you will. And I purposely didn't read it, but if we do go back to the idea of Josiah, right, in 2 Kings 23:25, the greatest thing said about Josiah and what we are left with, right as he is dying, is in verse 25, before him, that is Josiah, there was no king like him who turned to the Lord with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, nor did any like him arise after. Right? So the great spiritual legacy that Josiah built, and the great thing he's remembered for, is the fact that he didn't physically do anything besides give himself to God. He said every part of him was given to God, and that's what is remembered. That's why he is great, right? And that's what I wanted us to kind of get at with this question, is that what Solomon's exploring, one second, is that physically it is meaning, right? Physically, from that perspective, like Dad brought up with Solomon's temple, right? If you think that the cool thing is that we built a really nice house for God to live in, God doesn't live in houses. You missed the point entirely. It got destroyed. And if that was what you thought was great about being a Jew, well, you were crushed because it was destroyed eventually, right? But the fact that we did something that glorified God, that served Him, that's what mattered. And that's what made what we did not need.
Also want to caution that we don't go so far in that direction that we only think things that are spiritual, quote unquote, are good and worthy. That, it's only my time in church or in prayer or in reading the Bible. Everything else is, or only those people who have jobs that are definitely, focused on serving the church or in ministry or whatever, and all the other jobs are less than. We were called to work before Genesis 3, before the fall. We were called to work even in the garden. And all jobs, well, not all jobs, but where God places you in your life and where He is using you in your life is valuable and is for a purpose.
Yeah.
If we, keep, as you're saying, keep our eyes focused on how we can serve Him and all of that.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think we can get to where we classify things as spiritual or not spiritual.
Right.
And we can value those things and not see the value of cutting down trees or whatever else is your job.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. That
I actually think, that is a super important point, because if you keep that reasoning, I think we can also then get to the point where we think that there are aspects of our life that are justifiably not spiritual.
Yeah.
And that's not the point either, right? Romans 12:1, like our life holistically in totality is to be the living sacrifice. And so to Stephanie's point, whatever we're doing, it's got to be dedicated to God, whether it's labeled as dedicated to God or not. We have to make it so.
right now, and what
That idea, and I think it's really important to highlight, like you said, we can't classify, oh, this is spiritual work, this is a spiritual job, this is my physical job, this is my physical work, right? Because it's all, like Dad said, it's all devoted to God. It's all supposed to be working for God. And Paul himself says, not many of you should be teachers, right? Everybody has a purpose. Every vessel has a purpose, right, in God's house. And they're all going to be a little different. They're all going to be dedicated to different things, right? And it is our jobs to ensure that whatever we're doing is for God. And what I love about here in Ecclesiastes with verses 24 and 25 of chapter 2 is it's sort of a reductionist conclusion, if you will, right? It's because Solomon's saying, I did all the grand things, right? I did the incredible things. I built the temple. What matters is whatever you're doing, it's for God, right? That's what matters. Are you doing it for God? Are you living for Him? Are you finding contentment with the now and the fact that you can serve God in your position? Because that's what matters. Right? That is the grand conclusion from all the money he spent, the power he wielded, the lives he controlled, sacrificed, right? Whatever you want to put into there, because he would have done it all. And it's to, in your position, live for God. Do what you can. All right, we are running out of time. Are there any ending comments people want to make, ending questions we want to ask, anything like that at the end here of chapter 2?
Verse 26 was the most intriguing verse to me in this chapter. I just want to hear maybe a little bit more of an explanation of what that means. It doesn't have to come from you, that you possibly the class, but that one's the one that was very intriguing.
Yeah, I did actually have a little bit on that. I don't want to run us too far over. But I think you're probably referring to the fact that there's this idea that God is taking something from the sinner that he's then giving to those who serve him, right? The idea that to the one who, right? So we'll read that again. For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to one who pleases God.
Right? Is that kind of, okay. And we can open this up to the class as well. We might have to continue it next class. But my perspective and my answer to this is that what God has given to the faithful to Him, right, is true purpose in life. That is what the sinner is about, the business of gathering and collecting endlessly, as Solomon has pointed out, right? Because there's no fulfillment to the work. There's always more to be done. To the faithful, God has given a purpose to that work, right? And that no matter what you're doing, no matter how big or small it is, you're serving God, right? There is a fulfillment and a contentment that comes from that. That those who do not know God, who do not serve Him, their work doesn't provide that for them, right? It's not their end goal. It doesn't have that greater meaning that anything that those who follow God can have. I don't know if that's what you're thinking. All right. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and end there. If we want to talk more about verse 26, we definitely can next class. And we will pick up in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 next Sunday.